Afternoon, everyone. So in not the last video, but the 45-minute one I just did for hard ops, I had this thumbnail, and a lot of you asked me, because I didn't actually do a tutorial on making this, you said, how do I make this? So that'll be the topic of this video, making this cool looking render as well as the modeling process. So I'm just going to do like one of those longer form tutorials so you can follow along. And best part about this one, I'm just going to use the vanilla workflow, so no paid add-ons, except I might use Decal machine at the end just to, make it detailed and whatnot. So let me hop into screencast keys and we'll just get started with it. So I'm just going to tab into edit mode here and select all 4 of these edges and Control B to add a bevel. Now we just have to scroll up on the scroll wheel to give maybe like 10 segments. You don't have to have too many segments, just enough to round it out. And maybe to about here should be enough. And now all we have to do is get rid of these ridges, so we're going to right click and then shade smooth and then add on an auto smooth here. So now we need a chamfer on the top. If I bring the reference photo back in, the one I made, you can see we have this nice little chamfer going on, which is just a 45-degree bevel essentially. So let me pull that back over there, and as you may have guessed, we can select all these edges here just by alt-clicking, or you can just simply select the top face. It'll do the same exact thing. Now we're going to press Control B, and this time to scroll down on the scroll wheel, get ourselves a nice chamfer. And actually, I want to do the same thing down here. So I'll shift-click this so we have both selected. Control B, and pull the chamfer to about here. So that about does it. Now, here's the point where you can choose to go non-destructive, you can choose to go destructive, whatever you want. I mean, this is a piece that I'm not going to really be making too many adjustments to, so it's probably okay to go destructive even if we, can't revert the changes. So, you could add in a boolean cut here on the top if you didn't want to, go destructive, but I think it'll be fine here. So I'm going to press I to inset, and if I keep looking this way, I'm just referring to that model I made, so I make sure I make it the same way. And we're just going to pull it. Now you want to be careful, because if you pull it too far we get intersections, and you can clean this in like 2 clicks with Mesh Machine, but that's a paid add-on, so I'm trying to keep this vanilla. So let's just pull it to, about here or something. That should be okay. And then we'll go ahead and press E and then extrude it down on the Z, which that'll just be the automatic extrusion direction. So looks like I pulled it down about this far, so it's not too bad. Now I want to add in these little ridges that I had going on the side, so let me pull in the photo again. These little ridges here and up here. Now I'm not going to do this destructively, that would just take way too much time, so we can just use some booleans to get in these little indents here. So yeah, if you're using box cutter, you can easily come in here and do the cuts on your own. But if we're going to do it in vanilla, basically we're just going to bring in a cube here. Let me turn on screencast again. So yeah, I'm just going to hop into the top view and then just kind of position this thing in this general area. Let's move it over a bit. Let's move it up. And I put it to about here. And then of course, if you have the bool tool add-on enabled, which, if you're not using box cutter, you should, we can shift select this piece and press Control minus. There we go. Now we have a little cut in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide that guy. And it also looks like there is 2 little notches in this end. So I'm just going to add in another cube. These are tinier notches, so I'll add one in, and then it looks like what I did was beveled these 2 edges. So Control B, give this like, I don't know, like 6 segments. Should be okay. Shift click, Control minus, you get the drill, and then we're just going to move this up like so. Now you're going to see we still have ridges here, even though this has auto smooth turned on. You need to make sure you always smooth out your cutter. So we'll just smooth that out, and you auto smooth doesn't matter on the cutters, you can turn it on if you want, and there we go. Now you know what, this is probably a bit too big. Let me scale this on the X a bit, make it a bit smaller. Okay, there we go. And now all I want to do is mirror everything to the other side, so I don't have to, add the cut again or anything like that. So I'm going to go to the mirror modifier, add modifier, and then add on a mirror. This one's going to be across the X. We're going to bisect, so split it down the middle, and then flip the cutters to the other side. If you're using box cutter, Alt-X, click, and you're done. So this is how you do it in vanilla, and there we go. So a lot easier than mirroring the cutters. So now we need to get some little ridges here in the front like I had in the original photo. So this is just a lot of basic cutters. You know, we can use a cube for this guy and scale it down on the X. Control A to apply the scale. And it looks like I also rounded the edges on this guy, so Control B, maybe give this like 8 segments. Now I'm going to be careful where I put this because I want to make sure no edges are going to be where another edge is on the base mesh. Otherwise you're running the hotlining. You can't run a boolean in the same exact position as an edge is placed in the piece you're cutting from. If we run into that situation, I'll be sure to point it out. So we're going to do that, and of course shade smooth, auto smooth it, and let's just pull this up a bit. Or you know what? No, let's pull this down. And let's see, did I do anything else? I don't think so. So we'll shift click this and then control minus. Now I want these a bit more rounded, so let me undo. Make these a lot more rounded. Pull it down. I can't decide where I want to get these. Maybe I could go all the way. No, man, this is me being OCD with it. Can't decide where I want to put it. I'm just going to put it here and call it a day. So shade smooth, auto smooth, pull it down a tad, and then control minus. We can pull this up a bit to make it more rounded. Now we have limited space, so let's just be careful with it. And we'll just pull it down like that. We can always move these edges in a bit more if we want, like so, but I'm just going to leave it for now. Okay, so let's hide that cutter there with the H key. And now we have that. And you know what? This is just too close for my liking. I'm going to go into face mode, and if we alt click here and press S and then shift Z, we can move this in a bit more. Let's see, did that affect anything? Not really. Let's move this in a bit more. Probably too much. I think this will do, but what I am going to do is to kind of balance that. Oops. To balance that, I'm just going to bring this cutter in and then just move it out a bit, and you're going to see the mirror is also going to replicate. And we'll just go ahead and hide that. Let's do the same thing for this piece. Pull it out a bit, hide that, and we're pretty much good to go. So this looks decent. Now if we want to get the mirror to work again, all we need to do is put the boolean modifier here, which goes to this piece, above the mirror. So that way it adds the boolean and then flips it. Now I'm going to move these over a bit more so there's some more space here, like so, and then just go ahead and hide it. Now you're going to see in the corners here we have like the bevel is pinching where the chamfer is, right? So this area is causing like a little bit of stress here, as you can see. So to kind of ease that, all we need to do is drop in a few loops here to kind of even it out, and that'll fix the issue completely. You probably don't even need 3. Usually like 1 or 2 will be enough, but you know, we'll just leave 3 for now. That's fine. Same idea for the bottom here. We can just add in about 3 and call it a day. So already in just a few minutes we have this pretty cool looking cut, and it'd be even quicker if I wasn't making a tutorial. So yeah, we're making good progress. There are some other areas I do want to work on, so I'm going to hop into the front view here, and if we take a look at the reference, you can see I made this little red panel in the middle. So that's super easy. All we have to do is use a, oops, that was the wrong screen I moved, wasn't it? Give me 1 sec. Move that in here. Okay, there we go. So yeah, to get that red panel, we're going to essentially just run a slice operation directly through the center. Now I'm just going to move the 3D cursor back to the center with Shift S and then cursor to origin. Add in a cube, scale the cube down, and a little bit bigger than the main piece here. That should be enough. And then shift select this and press Control / on the number pad, and that's going to get you a simple little slice in the middle. Now I also want to get some small ridges here on the side, so same idea. You can always start with a simple cube and scale this guy up and just move it in. Now we want to be careful. What I'm actually going to do is go into wireframe view here, under viewport display, go to wireframe. We'll just pull this guy to about here. So I want to make sure the boolean isn't hitting this edge directly. I'm going to try to show you what happens. If I run a boolean like this, I don't know if I'm going to be able to replicate it, but watch what happens if this boolean hits this edge at a certain position. It's really hard to hit. For one, it's going to cause shading errors. Two, it's there's going to be manifolding issues. So essentially, when you run a boolean, just make sure it's not hitting an edge directly. Just pull it a bit farther, or a bit shorter, whatever you prefer, like that. And it's not cutting through this piece. So to fix that, I actually want to, let's see. Well, you know what? We can just run a difference through there as well. Maybe it would have been easier to run the slice afterwards, but at the end of the day, you know, you can just select that one and cut through there as well. So I'm going to hide this and then just turn off the wireframe view. We don't really need it anymore. And there we go, we're looking good. Now this is probably a bit too big, so with this cutter we can of course scale it on the Z however we want. That should probably be more than enough. Okay, and then I'm just going to go ahead and get this mirrored to the other side, so just make sure all your booleans are above the mirror. Make Blender happy, put this one above the mirror, and it's just going to flip to the other side here. As you can see, now we have a happy little cube here with a slice in the middle and a little cut on the side. The main downside of using vanilla workflow is that you have to keep repositioning the booleans in the stack, whereas with hard ops it does it automatically. So that's like, you know, I'm not too concerned about using manual cutters, but the modifier stack is just so annoying to deal with. That's where most of your problems come in, is just one of your modifiers is in the wrong position. Okay, anyways, what we have now, if we look at the photo, if I can bring it in, we have a few little notches here in the front, right about here and on the bottom and things like that. So we can add those in quite easily. So, you know, we'll just run a cube and put this roughly where we want that notch to be, so not a huge notch, just a tiny one. Right about here. Okay, and then I'm just going to pull the cube out. Let's pull it out this way. And then at this point, all we need to do is run a simple chamfer with Control B, and then run a difference boolean. And you're going to see it goes to the bottom. So we need to actually move this face here up so that doesn't happen. And there we go. So that's perfect, but actually not quite perfect because I want that to be a little bit bigger so we can scale it. So we'll scale that up a bit, and then of course, as you may have guessed, boolean needs to go above the mirror. It's going to flip to the other side, and we're making pretty good progress here. So what else are we missing? So it looks like in the reference photo for these pieces, it's also kind of slanted. Right here it's kind of slanted upwards, and there's also a hole in it, so let's add that in real quick. So in order to make that type of design, let's recall this guy. And to kind of pull it up, all I'm going to do is tab into vert mode, and I'm just going to select that bottom set of vertices there and just kind of roll them up. Move this down. Let's roll them up some more. Let's see, is that enough? Is it getting everything like I want it to? I might need to run a J right there to have a clear isolation point. You know, it's because I did a destructive bevel here, so that's why it's being a little bit difficult. So, you know what might be easier? It might be easier to just run a completely new cube. So I'm going to scale the cube down, and let's just try this again. So right off the bat, before I bevel anything, let me scale that down a bit. And I guess just before I bevel anything, we can actually pull this up right off the bat, pull this in, pull it down. And just make sure these vertices are already at an angle ready for us. So now if we run a difference, you can see it's already slanted, at which point we can just really get in here and do our own manual little 8-segment bevel, or however many segments we want to use. Pull that in. Okay, there we go, much better. So only thing is, this needs to be scaled a bit more, pulled over a bit more, like that, and then we can just go ahead and remove that old boolean and run this boolean above the mirror, and okay, there we go, that's much better. Okay, so that looks good for now. Now I want to add in a circle on the top, so all we need is a cylinder, as you may have guessed. I don't know how many segments I want, maybe like 40, let's check 40, 46 or something, I don't know. Doesn't have to be super rounded, so I guess like not super dense but not super low, so that way it still looks like a circle. And then we'll just scale this down and position it right there in the middle. Now if it was with a box cutter, this would be infinitely easier because you can actually snap it to the surface, but if you want to snap to the surface as in match the angle of this piece, you're going to actually have to go into face mode, go to align rotation to target, and then grab it and hold control, so that way it actually snaps there automatically. And now you can move this down by grabbing it on the local Z, so G, Z, Z, G, Y, Y to move it up. And then we can of course run a boolean right there. Okay, and for this piece we can get in here, move the boolean up, and I think that is basically how that one went. There we go. Okay, so let's go into the front view and let's add in the little notches that were in the front as well. So to scale this guy down, scale it on the Z, we'll go ahead and pull it out on the Y and scale it on the Y. This is all just very basic manipulation. I'm not going to explain too much what I'm doing because it should be obvious. So Control minus, we're going to add in a cut there and just adjust it a bit. And then as you may have guessed, boolean above the mirror. If you have hard ops, you won't have to do that, it's automatic, so thank goodness for that. And then I guess the rest of this piece was just a we'll hide this, so just another cube but just a bit bigger. So kind of like this. I just need to remember how I position this exactly. So it was something like this, I believe, and then I just pulled it back and scaled it up a tad. So now we have something like that, and you could also rotate it over the X if you wanted it to be more of like an angle or something. Maybe that's what I did. Actually, yeah, that is what I did. So I'm gonna rotate this over the X axis. Yeah, over the X 45 degrees, like that, and then we can grab it on the local Z or local Y maybe, and then pull it back, pull it down. Okay, this is actually how I did it before. I couldn't quite remember. So if we need more space, we can just pull one of those. And we could also rotate it at more of a steep angle if we wanted to, but I want it to match the general chamfer, so I'm actually going to leave it right about here should be okay. Yeah, that should be fine, and we'll go ahead and hide that piece. And then maybe we can go to this guy right here and just pull it up a bit so we have some more room. Make it look a little bit neater and cleaner. And there we go. So as far as the cube's concerned, that's about all I did for that piece. And I was using box cutters, so I knocked it out in 5 minutes, if that. So it looks like we have all the pieces we need. Now this is where it gets, it's not tricky, it's just tricky for some people who don't have the add-on. And it's all these little details, these circles here, these little ventilation units in the front. You can see those little circles. All the little notches and screws and things like that. So let me show an example. See this piece down here, these little vent holes? So let me show you what I would have to do if I wanted to add in those vent holes in vanilla. It's absolute insanity. It's to the point where it just doesn't make sense. It's like a confusing calculus problem trying to... See, I already tried to go into box cutter by what I'm used to. So if you were to do this in vanilla, you'd have to go in and scale all this down. You'd have to get some really, really tiny, you know, ventilation cuts like I was just showing you. So if I wanted a bunch of, you know, like a cool venting unit, I'd have to go in, take these guys, join them. I'd probably have to run an array modifier all the way down. Let me apply the rotation and scale. So yeah, I'd have to get in here and then, you know, pull one of these, run a difference boolean, and you know, that looks okay, but already look at the difference here. So the vert count right now is at about 4,435. If I delete these, look at that, we're down to 1,000. You just added an extra 3,000 verts for the most simple object for no reason. And not to mention, once we add a bevel in here, if I were to, you know, I'll show you in a second, if I were to run the bevel, let me push these, actually no, I'll leave it where it is, leave all those where it is. Yeah, if I were to add my bevel right now and turn off clamp, increase the segments, put it to angle, look at how quickly intersections start hitting. It's like, it's almost immediate. The artifacts occur, like before we even, if we had the tiniest amount of bevel, the artifacts already start hitting. So that's another huge issue. It's simply ridiculous to do it this way in vanilla, to add in this actual physical geo. Whereas I could just go into Decal machine like this, right? I just go into Decal machine, I find a screw. Let's see, let's just get a basic screw in here, or a basic like ventilation piece. I know we have one somewhere. Okay, here it is. So instead of doing all that like I just showed you, I can put in a decal, you know, maybe duplicate this a few times and just move it over. Keep in mind, this is a single plane. This is an extra 4 vertices each time I add one in. And look at that. You literally couldn't tell the difference compared to whether this is actual geo or if this is, you know, part of the mesh. And it'll become more obvious once you actually add in materials and things like that. But yeah, hopefully my point has been made, because this is an extra 4 times 3. This is an extra 12 vertices in your scene. Whereas if I made all of these using physical geo, it would have been thousands of extra vertices. It's insanity how easy Decal Machine is, and how silly it is to not use it in your work. It's just an amazing add-on, really. I'll put the link in the description if you haven't gotten it yet. So yeah, instead of adding in those holes manually, you know, we're going to be using decals for that, just because I cannot be bothered adding in physical geo. So yeah, same for these pieces over here. If I wanted to add in these circles, this looks like geo, right? It's not. This is literally a decal. This is a single plane, 4 vertices. And if I wanted to do that on this side, I'd have to go in, same idea, I'd have to go in with a cylinder. I'd have to rotate this guy. I'd have to, you know, array these across, run a difference boolean. I'd have to get in, move the boolean above the bevel, and it's just, you're just having a bad day after. Like if you come into Blender with a cranky mood, that's going to make you crankier. I can confirm. So instead of that, what we'd do is, you know, just find a nice decal somewhere. I'm not sure what I have available to me, but I can check. So this one right here is what I use. You know, you just rotate it 90 degrees. You scale this guy up, maybe to about here. And then all you have to do is just project it to the mesh. So we'll project it. That's probably a bit too emphasized there. That should be fine, especially if we go out of ortho, it'll show up quite well. So yeah, way easier than geo. You just pop those decals on, you're good to go. So with all this being said, enough of my spiel about Decal Machine. Let's get in here and add some materials. So this is a cool little metal crate looking thing, right? This has more of a metallic texture to it. So of course, when we add a new material, we want to make it metallic. So right off the bat, after we add in a material, let's pull it up to metallic, so it gets all those metallic properties. For base color, I'm going to make this a little bit on the darker side. So around there. And right off the bat, let's also take this guy here and, oops, there we go. Let's add a new material to this guy. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to apply all the booleans here. By the way, this is the modifier tools add-on. It's built into Blender. So if you go to edit preferences and type in modifier, you can turn on the modifier tools add-on and then you can apply everything at once. So I'm actually going to do that. And if you don't have access to the apply button, you have to add a new data user. Another pro of HardOps, you don't have to do that every time. So you're going to click apply all, and now this should be a separate piece, so we can just get in there and add a new material. Make this one like a rough type of red color. Maybe give it a little bit of clear coat. Make it a bit more exciting, and there we go. So as for the base material here, there are a few things you want to mess with just right off the bat. Metallic, if it's metallic, put it up to 1. If it's not, put it to 0. In general, you're not going to ever use an in-between because you have dielectric material, then you have metallic. In the real world, there's not really any in-between. So it's either going to be 1 or 0. So quite obvious there. Specularity, I never touch. Specular tint, that's only if you change that. I leave that. Roughness, you're going to change. If you want a reflective surface, drop the roughness. If you want a rough surface, increase it. Very, very simple concept. You can mess with this to your liking. I'm going to make this a little bit more shiny. Sheen, don't really use. Clear coat's nice if you want a little bit of extra detail on there. So I'm going to crank that to like 0.6 and then give it a bit of clear coat roughness so it's not super obvious. You can see that's better. And this should be fine for now. Now the reason this thing isn't popping is because we haven't applied a bevel yet to make this look good. Not to mention we haven't finished applying our decals. So let's go ahead and right off the bat add a bevel modifier. Change the limit method to an angle. About 3 segments should be fine. And then you can drop a hardened normal or a weighted normal. But first, before we do that, clamp overlap needs to be turned off. And we need to really mess with the offset here. Just a very slight offset. And let's also add a, you know what, we can just tick on harden normals for now. Okay, so the reason this thing isn't popping very nicely is because right here it starts pinching, right? First thing you can see, these shadows are crazy. I'm turning them off. Right here, you see how it's like triangulated and pinching? You need to change the outer miter type to an arc. First of all, that'll just clean it up. Second thing, this boolean is kind of annoying our base geo. If I go into wireframe, look at this. We have a big n-gon here, so we get bad shading and stretching. So to fix this, since we're still working non-destructively, meaning that boolean isn't applied there, we can actually, the trick I use is I turn on, this is only if I'm doing it in vanilla, I just navigate to, where's the big cutter that I used? Not this one. Right here, this guy. So I turn that on temporarily, and then I run a loop cut right below that point. Same for the top, right above it. So now the shading's confined to this area here, so it's not as big and noticeable. So if I turn off wireframe, you're going to see that shading is a lot more neatly held, and that's something we can work with a lot better. So yeah, that's just how you can quickly clean up shading if it's giving you some problems. So same idea for this piece, we can add a bevel, but there's a much quicker way than adding another bevel. Turn on the copy attributes add-on right here. Just, yeah, enable that guy, and then if we shift click the guy with the bevel and press Control C, we can copy the bevel right from it. So it's just a little bit quicker than adding in another manual bevel and adjusting all the settings and all that jazz. So now as you can see, the bevel is hitting flawlessly. You do need to check for any artifacts. Shading can be confined and fixed. Artifacts are a no-go. You need to fix your artifacts. So artifacts are those little black splotches that occur from overshooting vertices on the bevel. In this case, it looks like we're okay, but obviously if I really cranked this, then we get bad artifacts because, you know, I'll just show you. Because if the bevel goes too high, it starts overlapping, as you can see. So we just want to make sure that's not happening. That would be a big no-no for Blender, but overall the bevel's catching everywhere very, very nicely. So yeah, you can see the difference here between no bevel, which looks awful, and then bevel, which captures the light on the edges when it gets rounded. So, you know, most of you know this already, but this is also supposed to be another beginner's tutorial, so, you know, why not explain it as I go. Okay, so now when we go into material view, everything looks a lot nicer here. We have the bevels where we want them, and we can just start working on this some more. So as for the base material, you know, you can adjust the settings. I think I got mine where I want it. For this piece, I think it's fine. Got a little bit of clear coat on there and a little bit of roughness, so that looks good. So all we need to do is really get in here and just start adding in decals and things to make it look cool. So what I'm going to do is hop into front view. Let's add in some sort of screw like this. These types of screws I like adding in on slanted and chamfered surfaces. I just think it looks quite nice. Now decals don't work, or they work, but they don't look good in ortho. You need to make sure you're in perspective if you want it to look good. So it looks a little bit warped, so if I project this, it should be a bit nicer, or maybe not. Yeah, this one's not looking as exciting. Let me mess with a different one. Let's try, this is the one I used originally, so let's add this one in. Move it up on the Y a bit, and then we'll just go ahead and project it. And there we go, that looks a lot nicer, so that's looking okay. Now let's see what else we have here in the decal pack. So I believe I used this right here, this decal, and just put it in, you know, to scale it down and put it in. Alt Q, that's just my hotkey. By default it's the D key, but Decal Machine and Box Cutter both have a D hotkey, so I just change it to Alt Q to make it easier. So now we have that. Now these right here that I added, you're gonna see, one, they don't look very good. I wish these were a bit cleaner on the edges, but that white material has to go, so we can actually use the material matching system, or if that doesn't work, we can go to the material base color and drop that down like that. And then let's go ahead and mirror this to the other side, so add a mirror modifier. Perfect. And already you can see just after a few decals, this thing really starts to come together and look better. So now we can add in a few more decals, and then we'll just go ahead and preview this in cycles to see how it looks. So let's go in, and I'm going to add in the Team C logo. Where did I even get that one from? Oh, it's right here. Okay, cool. So yeah, sometimes just adding in text decals looks quite nice in my opinion. So add one of those there. We'll just project it. And for these logos, I don't want it to be too bright, so I'll just turn it up to metallic. Or if I don't want that, I can maybe... You know, with decals, I don't mind cheating the system and using a middle ground for metallic. That should be fine. Looks a little bit better that way anyways. And maybe just pull it down a slight bit. There we go. Looking good. So let's add in some of those ventilation units on the front. So I'm going to add in one of these guys here. Scale it down and then maybe position it to about there. Then I'm just going to duplicate, move it up a bit, and then duplicate this one. And I'm just going to do all of this by eye, really. That should be fine. So now we can just join all these together. And I can either, maybe I'll move it over here and then project it. Okay, project doesn't want to work with us right now, so I'll just leave it how it is, and then run a mirror modifier. So add a mirror. The mirror object is going to be this piece, and we are looking good. Now, only thing, this part gets cut off, so perhaps I could... Does that hurt us at all? No, that should be okay. We can just cut off and kind of smush those down a bit. That should be alright. And then the last few things I want to add in are some decals on the side and on the top, so not much left. So I'm going to go into the side view and just add in some simple screws. So maybe one like this. We'll add that there, and then we can just, you know, make life easy. Use a mirror. The mirror is going to be on the y-axis in this case, over this object, and then across the z as well. And then you know what, across the x-axis as well, why not? So one of the few situations in which I actually mirror across all the axes. Pretty interesting. So now we have some little bolts and screws on the side and things like that. Okay, so while we're at it, I think it's a good time to go into cycles, which you should be in by default, cycles render, and let's see how it looks. Not too bad. So my guess is your render does not look like mine right now, and that's fine. The number one rule, at least for rendering and getting just a more static, decent looking render, you need an overcast HDRI, meaning you need an HDRI that has very static lighting, neutral lighting, not any superimposing lighting that's coming from a directed source. So by default, you're going to have this. You're going to have nothing, just a simple color, and what a lot of people do is they just adjust the color. Now, this is a terrible way to do it for obvious reasons. This just looks awful. So what you actually want to do is use an HDRI which has natural lighting from the real world. So this is where I get all of my HDRIs from HDRIhaven.com. They're all completely free. You don't have to pay anything or sign up. This is where I get all of mine. Now there's one primary one I use like 99% of the time. So you go to the website, you go to HDRIs, you go to Overcast, because overcast is like a cloudy day where it's bright but there's no like clear direction the lighting's coming from, if that makes sense. So wait for this to load. I'm transferring files to Dropbox right now, so my internet's kind of slow because I'm transferring like terabytes of information, so give me a sec. Okay, so finally it loaded, so we're just going to scroll down to the one I use. Right here, Abandoned Slipway. This is like a godsend for HDRI, so get this one. I'll put it in the description as well. If I forget, just remind me and I'll put it in there. So, like I said, internet's slowing down because I'm transferring files, but I'd recommend going with an 8K or a 16K. 16K is probably overkill, but I would definitely go for an 8K to get as accurate lighting as you can. So yeah, you're just going to download this guy, and you're going to go into Blender, and under the world settings for color, go to environment texture, and then open up the HDRI file you just downloaded. So it's going to be purple until you open that file, so I already have mine in the scene, so open that up, and then ta-da, look what you have. You have a beautiful illuminated box now. Now let me show you something else just for those who don't know. So if you go to, you're probably going to see the HDRI, whereas I don't. Under the rendering settings, under under film, there's a transparent box. I would always keep this on unless you're messing with the HDRI. So take a look at this. Back here is like cloudy. Over here is still cloudy, but that's where the sun's hitting the most. It's bright. So most of the lighting is pushing from this direction, as can be seen on the box. And also when you rotate the box, you see the lighting at different directions, right? So not only does the HDRI matter, the position of your camera matters as well. We'll get into that shortly when we actually do the rendering. So yeah, just keep that in mind, but for now I'm going to turn on transparent and we'll be good to go. So we'll change the lighting positioning and all that in just a bit, but for now, before we do that, I want to finish adding in some decals. So to just top off everything, I'm going to go into the top ortho, add a few screws here on the top. So maybe like, actually, this is one of my favorites right here, this guy. So I'm going to add in a few of these, just put them in the corner, and let the mirror do the work for us. So add a mirror over this as the mirror object, and then over the Y as well. And just to make this a little bit cleaner, move that over. And then maybe I'll just put like a big decal in the middle here or something, like one of these. I don't know, these are pretty cool. So most of these decal packs you can get on Gumroad for free, and I have a few paid ones, but yeah, they're you can get decal packs everywhere really. And then I'm just going to project this onto the mesh, and there we go, we're basically finished. I don't think I added in anything else. This is pretty much ready for rendering. Actually, no, wait, I lied. I want to add in two little vents here in the bottom. So real quick, I'm going to add in a little vent there. And no, that's too small. I'm going to add in one here and then add in one over here. And there we go. Now I think I'm satisfied. So at this point we're ready to render, we're ready to make this thing look even cooler. The number one thing people do, and I was guilty of it for a long time, is you can have the coolest looking box, but it's going to look terrible unless you get the renderings to look good. So this next part is going to be heavily focused on rendering and how to get a good clean look for it. Okay, so what we're going to do is, first of all, you want to have this sitting on a plane, right? Right now it's just floating in space like the astronauts. So this thing isn't an astronaut, this thing's a box. So we need to make sure we treat it as such, meaning we're going to add in a plane and just let it sit right on top of that plane and just scale the plane up. And I'm going to do this in perspective so I have a good view. Okay, now another important thing, we're going to add a material. And it's important to know and understand how materials work, and that'll come with practice. So right now we have a white material with half roughness, and it's reflecting a lot of light back up here onto the object. This thing looks terrible, overexposed, and just doesn't look good. Now watch what happens if I change this to a metallic floor. Already starts cleaning up, and even more so if I change the base color to be darker. Now you can see those colors aren't reflecting as harshly on the mesh. It's looking a lot nicer. So the darker the color, the more the natural light comes back into play. So make sure you're careful with the color of the floor, and also whether it's metallic or whether it is rough, or dielectric rather. Okay, so usually for these renders I like to have a little bit of reflection on the floor like this, but maybe a bit more. If you go too high on the roughness, all of that reflection goes away, or most of it. Now it's just shadow. But if we have a lower roughness, you can see it starts bringing in that reflection. So I'm just going to go down to around 0.3. I like showing it, but not to the point where it's crazy exposed in the ground. So maybe like 0.336 would be okay. So check this out. If I delete the floor, you can see a lot of that lighting goes away on the sides because this floor is bouncing light back up onto the crate. Now if you ask me for all the physics behind it, I'm not a physicist, I don't know. I just know how the light works based on the material settings, and that's all you really need to know in Blender. And if you know the physics behind it, then even better, because you're a lot smarter than me, I suppose. So yeah, you can really see the difference compared to where this is placed and how it affects the lighting on the box. So you want to make sure you focus more on materials than the lighting per se. Now that's a very general statement, but for the most part it works. So this looks decent. I'm going to make it a little bit darker though, just a bit, and I'm not going to add any clear coat. I think this will be good. So once you set the materials are always number one. Get the materials looking good and how you want them. And then number two is moving the HDRI lighting to be in the position you actually want it to hit. So right now it's hitting in the back of this, so that's not really where I want the lighting. I want the lighting to be more on the front so I can see it. So this is usually what I do to adjust the lighting. I pull up a new panel, I go to the shader editor, I go to the world tab, and oops, okay, there we go. You're going to have this node set up right here. Basically, all we want to do is rotate the HDRI around the Z-axis, so it goes like this basically. That's how it works. So if I go and turn off transparency, watch what happens when I start rotating around the Z. It starts rotating the HDRI, and you can see the lighting starts moving around the scene. So usually what I do is I just, I get a good position where I think I want the render to be, right around here would be okay. I turn off the overlays panel, and then I just slowly rotate this guy and just see which area I want the light to hit. And already it's starting to move towards the front, looking a little bit worse as I go. So now it's kind of getting more towards the front. And then once you get to an area you like, I always recommend jotting down just mentally the numerical value you like. And then each time you get a better value, think of the new one and just jot it down mentally. So, if you want the light to hit from that side, then you keep rotating, but I think I want it to be coming in more to the front on the right side, which means it's going to have to be like probably around the hundreds area. I can't quite yet make a decision, so I'm going to pause the video till I find a value I like. So I think 125 is a good even value, so I'm going to leave it there. And yeah, this should be okay. Now one thing, it's okay to increase the strength of the HDRI, but you need to do it in very, very small quantities. If you're pumping the strength too high to the point where you're like at a value of 5 or 10 or something, you're doing something wrong. I would never recommend pumping the strength below or above like 2. You know, very, very minor increments, like 1.1 or 1.2 is like the most I usually go if I pump the exposure in the HDRI. So I'm going to put the strength to maybe like 1.2, so that looks decent. And now all we have to do is essentially add in a backdrop. Or you know what, you probably don't even need a backdrop, to be honest, because I can probably position the camera so it's only looking at the floor. So that brings us to the next part. We're almost done, I promise. So we need to add in a camera, and if you press Control-0 on the number pad, that'll make that camera the active camera, in which case we can go to View and then Align View, Align Active Camera to View. But you want to wait until you're in the position you like the most before you do that. So I think this position just depends where you want this to point. Right around here should be okay, and then we'll go to View, Align Active Camera to View. And right now my rendering settings are on 2560 by 1440. You could do like 1920 by 1080 if you prefer. And now all we have to do is grab this camera, and let's see what the settings are here. So 50 millimeters is generally what the human sees, so I'm going to move this back a bit on the local Z. You know, I just want there to be room. I don't want it to be, you know, too confined to the corners here. I want there to be breathing room around the edges, so I'm just going to move this out a bit. And I also want there to be blank area over here, so that way we can take this into Photoshop and add some text and stuff like that. So at this point, once you have the camera set up and you like how it looks, go here, turn on Render Region. This is how the render is going to look. So if there's anything you want to change at this point, go and change it. So in this case, I'm going to actually make the floor a little bit brighter, so bring the base color up a tad. And you're going to see that makes the box a little bit brighter as well. And if you want to reposition the camera over a bit more, you can do that. And yeah, this thing's looking pretty nice. Now I might increase the focal length a teensy weensy bit to like 54, just so it's a little bit more zoomed. And you know, that's even might be a bit too much. 50, oops, not 23, 53 might be the perfect point. Okay, so at this point we're ready to render. There are a few things I need to point out before you render though. So first things first, I render at a 16:9 aspect ratio using a resolution of 2560 by 1440, so that way it's just a little bit better quality. You can get away with 1920 by 1080 though. Make sure the percentage is at 100. Now we need to save as a 16-bit TIFF. That's all you have to change. And here, make sure the denoising data option is turned on. That's very important. Man, I'm losing my voice today. It's very important because we're going to be using Blender's AI denoiser, so that way when it renders, all the noise goes away. Next, for the rendering settings, you can just copy mine, just follow along. Render 100 to 200 samples will be fine. You don't need that many, contrary to popular belief. You can choose what you want to render with. I'm using GPU. Under light paths, copy these values here. Don't ask me why, just copy them. You're going to get good renders every time if you do that. This clamping 0 to 10 is fine. Caustics don't really matter. Film, transparent, but it's not going to matter too much because we're not looking at the background, so you know, do whatever you want with that. Tiles depends on if you're doing GPU or CPU. I'll let you be the judge of what you want to use for that. I'm using GPU at 2048 by 2048. That should be fine. And other than that, I don't think there's too much left to change besides in the compositor. So in the compositor, you want to add in a denoise node. So Shift A, filter. You want to add a denoise node and add in a glare node. So this is just the default compositor settings you always want to have in. And I trust that everyone here can look at the screen and connect up how these connection points are set up. Make sure you change the glare to fog glow, because fog glow is actually what brings out the bloom effect in the Cycles rendering engine. So anyways, at this point we're ready to go in and we can press F12 and render this guy out. So this should take just a few minutes depending on your machine. That's why we used all the settings I told you to use, because you can get away with just a couple minutes for the render to finish. So Looks like mine's going to be about a minute, so I'm just going to pause the video here. So here it is, and at this point all you need to do is save the image as a, once again 16-bit TIFF is very important for the quality, and at this point I'm just going to go in here and I'll just save it as bucks. And now all we have to do is make this thing look better. It looks good, but not good enough. Okay, so I just brought this guy into Photoshop here, and we just need to make this thing look a little bit cleaner, and Photoshop post-processing is the best thing you can do to your renders. And I don't want to take all the credit here because my good friend Ryu, a lot of you probably follow him as well, another hard surface artist, he has taught me a ton just in general about Photoshop, compositing, post-processing, all of that. So I've learned a lot of these techniques from him, which I'm just passing on to you. So if you want to learn from a photographer, a pro, modeler, everything artist related, go to his channel and check that out. I'm just going to kind of show you some of the stuff he taught me for post-processing. I've definitely gotten better at it over the months. Okay, so we're going to have a layer 0 here. I'm going to press Ctrl J. We're going to make a duplicate so that way we always have access to the base render. So first thing, on this duplicated layer, we're going to go to the camera raw filter and just do a few adjustments here. First thing, I'm going to bump the exposure up just a tad bit, maybe to 0.25. I'm going to bump the shadows just a bit and maybe bump the white just a bit, and you can kind of see this helps bring out the metallic a bit more. Everything else, maybe, no, we can paint that in. So we're going to add in some texture and clarity, but we're going to actually paint that in. Let me show you. So texture and clarity brings out the texture and clarity, as you can see, but I only want to bring it out for the box and not the rest of the scene. So to do that, we can go to the brush tool, and in here maybe we'll paint in some shadows, paint in some texture, and paint in some clarity, and we're just going to go all around this box here and just paint across, try to get every single spot. Now as you paint, you're not going to see a difference. I think it's like an illusion or something, but watch what happens if I undo and then redo. It's like night and day. It's interesting because when I paint the detail, I never see the detail changing until afterwards. I don't know why, but it's interesting, and especially these areas where it's a little bit darker, you can see those come out a lot nicer. So that's why you want to paint that stuff in. For now, we're just going to click OK. This kind of bumps it up a bit. As you can see, this looks way better now. And this is another plugin that Ryu introduced me to, the Infinite Color plugin. And this thing basically just does like color balancing, color grading, all that stuff in just a one click to make it easier. So I'm just going to go to light and then click on create, and usually you just click through until you get a nice one. Actually the first one was decent, so I'm going to stick with the first one. So you can see the difference here. So this is the base render, and this is with a little bit of color grading. Looks way better now. So I actually got lucky with the first shot, so I'm happy with how that looks. Now we're just going to drop in some text. So I'm going to add in some text here, click it. We're just going to call this, I don't know, the blend box. Something, whatever you want to call it, you know, you just put in some text. And you can just go to Google and look for sci-fi text fonts, and you know, just change through the fonts. You don't want to have a boring one like Calibri, or Calibri, however you pronounce it. Looks boring. You want like a cool sci-fi text, right? You know, like something like that, or maybe Oasis. Oasis is pretty cool. Space Age is pretty cool. You know, really whatever you want. So I'm gonna do the, I'm gonna do Space Age. I think Space Age is quite nice. We'll add that in, and now all we need to do is just get this in a nice spot on here. So I guess I'm low on disk space now, so I need to deal with that after the video. Anyways, just get this text in a nice neutral spot that catches the eye. I'm going to drop the fill a bit so that way it's not like too imposing on the scene. And then maybe change the color to more of a silver. I can't really decide. This is like the #1 issue I have when I do this, is deciding what looks good. So I'll just put the blend box over here, and then maybe I'll add in some more text and maybe put my signature down on the bottom, and just make this one a different font like Oasis, whatever. We'll put this down here. drop the fill like that, and yeah, it's looking pretty good. And you know, you could get creative with it. You could put like your own logo over here or something, or some more text, really whatever you want. But I think this is pretty cool where it is. And now what I want to do is take everything but the base layer. So shift click, press Ctrl Alt Shift E, and that's just going to add in a layer with everything fused to it, as you can see. So now I'm just going to go back up here to the camera raw filter and add in a tiny bit of vignetting. So under effects, we'll just give a little bit of vignette, just a slight amount. You can kind of see the difference there. We have a little bit of a border going on. And last thing, I'm just going to adjust the contrast just a tad bit. So I'm just going to select this new layer. We're going to go to, I'm using the add-on that Ryu suggested me to get, the Nick collection with color effects. You can do the contrast manually if you want. It's not like super crucial from what I've seen. It just adds a little bit of a nice touch to it. So I'm going to go to the Pro Contrast, click on that. That already made a difference. Give it a little bit of extra contrast here, a little bit of a boost, and a little bit of shadows. And we'll just wait for that to load in, and then you're going to see the difference is a little bit nicer. Wait for that to load. So that's with the contrast enhanced, and this is without. So without, with, without, with, a little bit nicer. So at this point you just have to go to File, Save As, and then save it as a JPEG, which I've already done. And then yeah, you're pretty much good to go. So hopefully this video gave you a little bit of insight into the Blender and rendering Photoshop workflow, and you have a pretty cool looking render after doing this video. So I'd love to see how yours looks. You can send me a picture on Twitter or Instagram. And anyways, until the next video, I will see you then.